I never imagined that a simple night could change everything. I was always the person who believed in love, in marriage as a refuge, a place of mutual support where mistakes could be forgiven and hearts healed. When I met my husband, I saw him as the man I wanted to grow old with, someone who would share all my dreams, my joys, and even my sorrows. I loved him deeply, more than anything. And he seemed to love me the same way. We had our difficulties, like every couple does, but we were always partners. When he went out for a drink with a friend, I thought it would just be a fun night, something he needed to unwind after a stressful week at work. I had no idea that this simple outing would be the start of a turn I could never have predicted. The night passed, and around 2 a.m., I heard the door. He came home completely drunk, and what should have been a peaceful arrival turned into something I couldn't even believe. I tried to ask what had happened, but before the words left my mouth, he was already shouting, his face twisted by rage and alcohol. I watched him knock over the lamp, break the living room table, and in the midst of it all, curse me in ways I never imagined hearing. He, who had always been my support, had become someone I feared. I tried to control the situation, tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't listen. And when he threatened me, something inside me shattered. It was as if, all of a sudden, I was facing a stranger, someone who no longer saw me with the same affection. I, who had always seen him as the man I loved, was now facing a version of him completely lost, out of control, under the influence of something I couldn't understand. If you're here, watching this story, maybe you know what it feels like when life turns upside down without warning. I never thought I would be capable of making the decision I made that night, but I will tell you everything until the end. So, if you're still curious, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because what I'm about to share with you will move you in ways you never imagined. I never imagined a night could change everything. It happened so quickly that I barely had time to process what was going on. One moment, I was waiting for him to return from his night out, expecting a late-night conversation about how his day went. The next, I was standing in front of a man I didn't recognize, a stranger wearing the face of the person I loved. He came through the door stumbling, his eyes bloodshot, his breath heavy with alcohol. At first, I thought he was just tired, maybe a little tipsy from a few drinks, but nothing prepared me for what was coming. He didn't even look at me. It was as though he didn't see me at all. I tried to speak, tried to ask him what had happened, why he was so different, but before I could get a word out, he was already shouting. I felt the ground beneath me shake as his voice echoed through the house, sharp and angry. "Where's the dinner I asked for? Where's my damn respect?" He yelled, his words slurred but heavy with venom. His face was twisted in a way I hadn't seen before, like something deep inside him had snapped. My heart started racing, and I took a step back, not knowing what to do. I wanted to help him, calm him, but the rage in his eyes kept me frozen. Then came the crashing sounds. First, a lamp, then a chair, then something heavier. The living room, once peaceful and familiar, was now a war zone. I watched as he tore through the space, his anger so uncontrollable that it seemed to consume him entirely. I stood there, paralyzed, not knowing if I should try to stop him or leave the room. I had never seen him like this before, and the fear that settled in my chest was unlike anything I had ever felt. This wasn't the man I married. This wasn't the man I had built my life with. Who was he now? I tried to speak again, my voice trembling, barely above a whisper. "Please stop. You're scaring me." But my words were like water on fire.
He didn't hear me. He didn't care.
Instead, he looked at me, his eyes burning with something I couldn't understand, and for the first time, I saw the hatred in them. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was as if he had turned into someone else, someone I didn't know. And in that moment, I realized I was no longer safe. Not just physically, but emotionally too. The man I trusted, the man I believed in, was slipping away, and I was powerless to stop it. I stepped backward, my hands shaking as I held onto the wall for support. He saw me retreating, and that only seemed to fuel the fire. "Where do you think you're going?" he spat, his voice low and threatening. I froze, unable to respond. He wasn't the man who had held me when I cried, or the one who whispered that everything would be okay. That person was gone. In his place was a version of him I couldn't recognize, a man who had been consumed by something darker. I couldn't do this. I couldn't stand here and watch the man I loved destroy everything we had. The fear was overwhelming, but there was something deeper, something more painful, that cut even deeper. Disappointment. I was disappointed in him. But worse, I was disappointed in myself for letting it get this far. How had I missed the signs? How had I not seen that something was wrong? But then, something changed in me. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't going to stand here and let him break me. I didn't deserve this. I didn't deserve to feel like a prisoner in my own home, to be afraid of the person I loved most. It was then, in the midst of the chaos, that I knew. I had to make a choice. Was I going to stay, to keep enduring this new version of him? Or was I going to leave? The thought of leaving terrified me, but staying felt like a death sentence. I don't know if I can explain what happened next, but it felt like the end. Like a switch had flipped in me, and for the first time, I realized I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep forgiving a man who couldn't control his anger, who let alcohol take over his soul. I stood there, trying to steady my breath. "What's happening to us?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. He didn't answer. He just looked at me, his face cold, as if he didn't care at all. If you've ever been in a situation like this, where you feel like you're losing the person you love, where everything you thought you knew crumbles before your eyes, I can't even begin to explain the pain. It's a kind of loss that cuts deep, not just in your heart, but in your very being. What would you do in a moment like that? What would you do if you found yourself in my shoes? Please share your thoughts in the comments. I need to know I'm not the only one who's been through this. If you felt this kind of pain, I want to hear your story. And if you're still with me, still curious to see where this story goes, stay tuned. The worst is yet to come. The morning after, everything was different. I woke up, disoriented, and the house was eerily quiet. I could still hear the echoes of his rage reverberating through my mind, and the broken pieces scattered across the living room floor felt like a cruel reminder of what had happened. I stood there for a moment, staring at the destruction he had left behind. A lamp shattered into 1,000 pieces, the table cracked in half, and the chairs lay upturned, like victims of some uncontrollable force. The whole place felt foreign to me now. I was still shaking, unsure of what to do. I had stayed up most of the night, trying to process what had happened, but no matter how many times I replayed it in my mind, it didn't make sense. This wasn't the man I married. This wasn't the man who had promised to love me, cherish me, and protect me. This wasn't the man I had built my entire life around. I kept hoping that maybe it had been a nightmare, that when I woke up, everything would go back to normal. But that wasn't going to happen. When he walked into the living room, I couldn't even look at him. He was sober now, but the weight of the night before still lingered between us like a dark cloud. He didn't say a word at first, and I didn't either. The silence was suffocating, heavy with unspoken words, heavy with the things neither of us wanted to face. Finally, he broke it. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that sent a chill through me. "Are you going to keep ignoring me?" he asked. "You know it wasn't my fault." I looked at him, my heart sinking with every passing second. His words were like daggers, sharp and cold. There was no apology in his voice, no remorse. It was as though the events of the previous night had meant nothing to him, as though I meant nothing. I felt my stomach twist in a way I had never felt before, like a cold wave of realization crashing over me. The man I thought I knew, the man I had trusted with everything, was gone. What stood before me was a shell, a cold version of him that had no understanding of the pain he had caused. "How could you say that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "How could you think that I could just forget what happened?" He didn't respond. Instead, he walked past me as if I wasn't even there. I felt the weight of his indifference crush me. It wasn't just the anger. It was the way he dismissed me, the way he refused to acknowledge the damage he had done. I was nothing to him now, just another inconvenience in his life. For a moment, I thought I might break down right there, right in front of him. But I didn't. I couldn't. Something in me had changed the night before, and as much as I hated it, I knew I could never go back to being the woman I was before. I had been broken, but I wasn't going to stay broken. "You've changed," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "I don't even know who you are anymore." His eyes met mine, and for a brief second, I saw a flicker of something, maybe guilt, maybe fear. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that cold, emotionless look that had taken over him. "It's not my fault," he repeated. "You don't get it." I wanted to scream, to tell him that he was wrong, that he had hurt me in a way that I couldn't even begin to explain. But I stayed silent. What was the point? He wasn't listening. He didn't care. I knew that now. It wasn't just the violence. It wasn't just the broken furniture, the shattered glass, or the angry words. It was the complete lack of empathy, the way he couldn't see how much pain he had caused. I had been a part of his life for so long, and yet, in that moment, I felt like I was nothing more than an afterthought to him. I was invisible. I wasn't even worth his attention, his respect, or his remorse. And that realization, how hollow he had become, was worse than any of the physical damage he had done. I had always believed in his goodness, in his kindness, in the man he had shown me before. But now, all I saw was a stranger. A man who was so consumed by something, by whatever it was that had taken hold of him, that he couldn't even recognize the person who had once loved him unconditionally. I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know how to deal with the fact that the person I thought I'd grow old with was someone I could no longer trust. I thought I could fix him. I thought I could help him find his way back to the man I knew he could be. But now, I wasn't even sure he was capable of finding his way back. I wasn't sure he cared enough to try. The silence between us grew heavier. I stood there, my chest tight with the weight of everything that had happened. My eyes were fixed on him, but my mind was 1,000 miles away. I wasn't sure how long we stood there like that, in the thick of the uncomfortable silence. But I knew, deep down, that things would never be the same again. He was a man I didn't recognize anymore, and no matter how much I wanted to hold on, I couldn't hold on to something that wasn't there anymore. Part 3. The days after that morning felt like a blur, as if I were walking through a fog that wouldn't lift. It was as if everything I had known about our life together was slowly disintegrating in front of me, and I had no control over it. I kept waiting for some sign, some glimmer of hope that he would snap out of it, that he would realize the damage he had done. But every time I looked at him, it was like staring at a stranger. He was still the man I had loved, but at the same time, he wasn't. The man I knew was kind, thoughtful, gentle. Nothing like the one who had torn our home apart. The distance between us grew every day, and I could feel it in every glance, in every word left unsaid. I tried to hold on to something, anything, to bridge the gap between us, but it felt pointless. The more I tried, the more I realized he was no longer the person I could reach. He had changed, and the saddest part was that I couldn't even tell when it had started. Was it the night he came home drunk, or had it been before that? Was this the man he always was, hidden behind a mask I had chosen not to see? I couldn't stop asking myself these questions, but every time I did, the answers only made things worse. I wasn't even sure if he cared anymore. The emotional distance between us was suffocating, like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. There were days when he wouldn't even look at me, wouldn't even acknowledge my presence. And on the rare occasions when he did speak, it was as if I was nothing more than an inconvenience to him. He would brush me off with a cold remark or a dismissive glance. I wanted to confront him, to ask him how he could be so indifferent, but each time I opened my mouth, the words felt hollow. I could see it in his eyes. He didn't care. I wasn't important to him anymore. And that realization, it hit me harder than anything else. It wasn't the broken furniture or the shattered glass. It wasn't the raised voice or the threats. It was the fact that I had become invisible to him. I wasn't the woman he loved anymore. I wasn't even someone he respected. He had become so consumed by whatever darkness had taken hold of him that he could no longer see me, hear me, or understand me. The person I had once trusted with my heart, the person I had believed would stand by me no matter what, was now a stranger. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking at the person I had once loved, but knowing that there was no way back. The more I tried to reach out, the more I realized that he was slipping further away from me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I was losing him. I was losing the man I had built my entire life around. And worse, I was losing myself. I didn't know who I was anymore in this relationship. The woman I had once been, full of hope and love, had slowly disappeared. I had become someone else, someone who was afraid, someone who was constantly walking on eggshells, someone who wasn't sure if she would be safe in her own home. The pain of losing him was nothing compared to the pain of losing myself. I tried to remind myself of the love we once shared, of the good times we had before everything changed. But it was hard to hold on to those memories when everything around me felt so broken. I didn't know if I could ever get back to who I was before. I didn't know if I could ever trust him again. But there was one thing I did know. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. And so I made a decision that tore me apart, but one that I knew I had to make. I couldn't stay in this toxic environment any longer. I couldn't keep hoping that things would magically get better. I had to let go. It wasn't an easy choice. It wasn't something I wanted to do. But deep down, I knew it was the only thing left for me. I had given him everything. I had loved him with everything I had. But now, I had to love myself enough to walk away. As much as I had tried to fix him, to fix us, I realized that I couldn't fix something that was already broken beyond repair. I couldn't stay in a relationship that made me feel less than I was, a relationship that made me question my own worth. The hardest part wasn't walking away, though. It was accepting that I had done everything I could, that I had loved him with every ounce of my being, and it still wasn't enough. That was the part that hurt the most, the fact that no matter how much I tried, it would never be enough for him. And as I stood there, looking at him for the last time, I knew it was over. I couldn't keep living in a world where I was invisible, where I was nothing but a shadow in someone else's life. I deserved more than that. We both deserved more than that. The decision wasn't easy. It never is when it involves someone you once loved with all your heart. But in that moment, as I stood there, staring at the man I had spent years with, I knew I couldn't keep going. I couldn't stay in this relationship that had turned toxic, that had slowly but surely eroded the person I once was. I wasn't afraid of him, not anymore. What terrified me was the person I had become. The constant worry, the constant walking on eggshells, the fear that I could never be myself again in this home. I had lost my sense of self, my joy, my laughter. I had become a mere shadow of the woman I used to be. I couldn't keep living like this, pretending that things were fine, when deep down I knew they weren't. I had to take control of my life again. I had to make the hardest decision of my life. Leaving him felt like tearing apart a part of my soul. It wasn't just the man I was leaving behind. It was the future we had dreamed of together, the life we had planned, the love that once felt so strong and invincible. But that love had faded, replaced by something I couldn't recognize, something that made me feel small, insignificant, and scared. I tried to convince myself that things would get better, that he would change, that he would come back to the man I fell in love with. But every day, I realized that the man I knew was gone. The man standing before me was someone entirely different, someone who no longer cared about me, about us. And with that realization came the overwhelming truth that I had to leave. It wasn't about him anymore. It wasn't about trying to fix something that was beyond repair. It was about me, about finding myself again, about remembering who I was before I lost myself in this relationship. I stood there, looking at him, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. I didn't need his approval or his understanding. I knew what I had to do, and that was enough. I knew that walking away would break my heart, but staying would destroy me. "I'm done," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was breaking. He didn't react at first, just stood there, staring at me. It was as though he hadn't even heard me. But that was the moment I realized. It didn't matter. It didn't matter what he thought or how he felt. What mattered was that I was finally choosing myself. He didn't care, and that was the hardest truth to accept. But I had to. I couldn't keep waiting for him to change, for him to recognize the damage he had done. I had waited long enough. I had spent too many sleepless nights hoping for something that wasn't going to happen. I had to take my life back. And so, with a heavy heart and a soul full of pain, I walked away. I walked away from the man I had once loved, from the life I had once dreamed of. I walked away from the person who had once been my everything because I realized that I was losing myself in the process. I was slowly disappearing, and I couldn't let that happen. As I packed my things, I didn't look back. I couldn't. The pain was too much, and I knew if I looked back, I would stay. I would stay in a relationship that no longer made me feel alive, that no longer made me feel loved. And I couldn't do that to myself. I had to keep moving forward, no matter how difficult it was. As I walked out of that door, I felt an overwhelming sense of sadness, but also a sense of relief. For the first time in months, I felt like I was breathing again. It wasn't easy. It wasn't something I wanted, but it was something I needed to do for myself. I knew it would be hard. I knew the road ahead would be full of challenges. But I also knew that I couldn't keep living in a toxic environment. I couldn't keep hoping for a change that wasn't coming. I had to choose me. I had to choose my peace, my happiness, my future. And in that moment, walking away was the only choice I had left. It wasn't a failure. It wasn't giving up. It was survival. And I was going to survive. It wasn't until I stepped outside the door, leaving the man I once called my husband, that I truly felt the weight of what I had done. The pain was overwhelming, like a tidal wave crashing over me, but at the same time, there was a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. I was free, but not in the way I had imagined. Freedom wasn't just a release from him, it was a release from the version of myself I had become. I had spent so long putting his needs, his feelings, his desires above my own that I had lost sight of who I was. But now, as I stood outside, feeling the cool air on my face and the weight of my decision pressing against my chest, I realized I was finally reclaiming my life. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. I knew that. There would be days when I would look back and wonder if I had made the right choice. There would be moments when the pain of what I had lost would feel unbearable. But even in those moments, I knew I had made the right decision. I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for someone who didn't even see me anymore. I had to learn to stand on my own 2 feet again, to find the strength I thought I had lost. I had to rebuild myself from the inside out. And as hard as it was, I knew that was the only way I would ever truly heal. In the weeks that followed, I started the slow process of putting my life back together. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt like I couldn't go on, days when the weight of the past crushed me so completely that I could hardly get out of bed. But there were also days when I found joy again, moments of peace where I could finally hear myself think, moments where I could remember what it felt like to be happy. I started reconnecting with people who cared about me, people who hadn't been part of my life for a long time. And slowly, I began to find pieces of myself that I thought were long gone. I started to remember who I was before all of this happened. The woman who had dreams, who believed in love, who had a future she was excited about. I had almost forgotten her. But as I started to heal, I remembered her. I remembered that I was worthy of love, worthy of respect, and worthy of a life that brought me peace. I had spent so long putting his needs above my own, I had forgotten how to take care of myself. But now I was learning. I was learning how to set boundaries, how to say no, how to put myself first. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I knew that I could never go back to who I was before, and I didn't want to. The person I was becoming was stronger, more resilient, more self-aware. She was someone who could take on the world, who could face whatever challenges came her way, and who knew her worth. And as I began this journey of healing, I realized that I wasn't alone. There were so many people out there who had gone through similar experiences, who had been broken by life, but who had also learned to rebuild themselves. It was a journey, and it was one I had to take on my own. But in sharing my story, I hope that I could help others who were in the same place I had been, struggling to find a way out of the darkness. This wasn't just about me. It was about all of us. Those of us who had been hurt, who had been left behind, who had been made to feel small. We are all worthy of healing. We are all worthy of love, and we all deserve a second chance at happiness. So, if you're here, if you've been following my story, I ask you to take a moment to think about your own journey. We've all been through pain, but that doesn't define us. It's how we rise from it that truly matters. If you've found something in my story that resonates with you, please subscribe to the channel. These stories matter, and we need to keep them alive. Your voice matters. Your story matters. I invite you to leave a comment below, share your thoughts, your experiences, or even just your support for someone who might be struggling right now. Let's keep these conversations going because it's only by giving voice to our pain that we can truly begin to heal. And don't forget to check out other stories from the playlist. There's a link in the description or in the pinned comment. These stories are here for a reason, and I hope they remind you that you are never alone. We are all on this journey together.